Just minutes after the giant asteroid hit the Earth, it was as if our planet suddenly became a different world. The once blue sky was covered by thick clouds of ash, smoke, and molten rock spewed by the impact across different parts of the globe. Earthquakes followed one after another, and the force of the shock wave was strong enough to circle the entire planet. According to scientists who studied the Chicxulub impact crater in Mexico, the asteroid impact was possibly even more powerful than billions of nuclear bombs exploding at the same time. And because of this, within just a few hours, forests across different continents began to catch fire. This wasn't an ordinary fire. It was as if the whole world turned into a giant oven. The rocks and debris that were thrown out of the atmosphere fell back to Earth like a rain of fire from space. As they re-entered the atmosphere, they generated extreme heat. And according to some studies, the heat in many places on the surface could reach over 1,000 degrees Celsius. Almost no large animals survived in the open areas. The dinosaurs that once ruled the Earth for over 160 million years gradually disappeared. But fire wasn't the only problem. After the impact, billions of tons of ash, sulfur, and smoke rose into the upper atmosphere. That's why sunlight was gradually blocked. For many months, or possibly even years, the world became dark. It was like a permanent twilight. According to scientists, this is called an impact winter, which is almost the same concept as a nuclear winter. Because there wasn't enough sunlight, plants started to die. Photosynthesis stopped. And when the plants disappeared, the entire food chain began to collapse. First the small animals, then the bigger ones, until many ecosystems completely collapsed. In forests that weren't completely burned, you could hardly hear anything. No chirping, no movement. Nothing but ash, smoke, and trees turned to charcoal. But even though it seemed like the end of everything, life still didn't completely disappear. Underground, some small mammals managed to hide in their burrows. In the rivers and swamps, there were creatures that survived because they were more protected from the intense heat. In the ocean, there were microscopic organisms that continued to live even with little light. They would become the beginning of a new world. As thousands of years passed, the dust in the atmosphere slowly settled. Little by little, sunlight returned. Plants began to grow again on the once scorched land, and from those few survivors, evolution started once more. The former world of the dinosaurs was replaced by a new era, the age of mammals, the era of creatures that were once small and barely noticed while giant reptiles dominated. In fact, if that asteroid impact hadn't happened around 66 million years ago, we might not be here today. Because sometimes in Earth's history, a catastrophic end also becomes the beginning of a new world. But before we start, don't forget to like this video. It means a lot to us creators. Thank you very much, and now let's get started. Despite this, when we hear the term mass extinction, usually only one thing comes to mind right away. The end, an asteroid, volcanoes, darkness, the destruction of the entire world. But according to scientists, the actual impact is just the beginning of the real nightmare. Because after the fires died out, an extremely long period of cold and hunger began. In the first year after the asteroid impact, the sun was almost no longer visible. The thick dust and smoke in the atmosphere acted like a permanent curtain blocking the light. Even at noon, everything still looked like dusk. And as time went on, the temperature kept dropping even more. This wasn't just the usual cold weather we experienced during the rainy season or in December. This was the kind of cold that felt like it was slowly killing the entire planet. According to studies about the Chicxulub extinction event, global temperatures dropped significantly after debris covered the atmosphere. In many places, normal ecosystems had almost stopped functioning. The air itself was very different, heavy, dusty, and smelled like burnt metal and sulfur. When it rained, it wasn't normal rain that fell. Because of the sulfur and chemicals that entered the atmosphere from the impact and wildfires, much of the rain back then possibly became acidic, gradually destroying the remaining plants. The trees that weren't consumed by fire just stood there like dead statues. There were no more leaves, the wood was peeling, and on the ground was a thick layer of black ash carried by the cold wind. And the scariest thing of all, the world was silent. There were no bird songs, no sounds of animals in the forest, no movement. Only occasionally would you hear the fall of a dry branch or the sound of light rain on dead leaves. It was as if Earth had become an abandoned planet. At that time, the food chain almost completely collapsed. The once interconnected ecosystem had been reduced to fragmented remnants of life. But there were still some creatures that struggled to hold on. Most of the surviving mammals back then were very small. Some were only as big as a human fist. They weren't strong, they weren't fast, but they had one advantage that the big dinosaurs didn't have. They could hide. As the surface of the earth slowly died, the burrows of the small mammals became even deeper. There they sought warmth and protection from the cold and toxic environment above. And because there was almost no food left, they couldn't be picky anymore. They would eat whatever they could find. Insects, plant roots, fungus growing on decaying wood. Even a small amount of food every few days was enough to survive a little longer. In that dark and cold world, strength wasn't the most important thing. Not speed, not size, but rather the ability to endure while the planet slowly recovers. Even so, on the surface of the Earth, life seemed to be slowly disappearing. But in some corners of the planet, there were creatures quietly waiting for the chance to live again. As the dinosaurs disappeared, a few species of birds survived. According to scientists, modern birds today are descendants of small dinosaurs that survived the extinction event. Back then, they rummaged through the ashes to find leftover bones and food. In the swamps and slow-moving rivers, there was another group of survivors that was almost unaffected by the chaos above: crocodiles. While many large animals were dying, the crocodiles remained almost motionless in the mud and water. Because they have a slow metabolism, they can survive for a long time even with little to no food. While other species desperately searched for food, these reptiles quietly waited. But something even stranger is happening under the ocean. Because the dust in the atmosphere is so thick, almost no sunlight reaches the surface of the Earth. And because of that, the plankton population in many parts of the ocean also collapsed. When the plankton disappear, a domino effect follows. The small fish gradually disappear, then the bigger ones follow, until even the apex predators in the ocean start to die. It's like the world beneath the sea became a silent graveyard. But even so, there are still some places full of life. Deep on the ocean floor, there are volcanic vents that continue to release heat and minerals from inside the earth. And according to scientists, this is where some microscopic organisms survived without relying on sunlight to live. Instead of sunlight, chemicals and minerals from the vents serve as their source of energy. While the surface world is dying, there are ecosystems in the depths of the sea where life continues. And in the hot parts of the ocean floor, there are small crustaceans and deep-sea organisms that still find safe places. At a time when the surface of the planet was almost freezing over, the deep sea became one of the last refuges of life. Months passed, but it seemed like the seasons no longer mattered. You couldn't tell if it was morning or afternoon because the sky was almost permanently gray. Fine ash continued to fall from the atmosphere. It was like endless smoke slowly covering the world. After a long silence, something began to move again. Beneath the ash and ice, there were roots struggling to dig into the ground. On the decaying wood, fungus and spores began to grow. Microscopic life was slowly returning to the surface of the earth. Quiet, slow, but steady. Because life on Earth does not simply give up. No matter how many times it almost disappears, it always finds a way to come back. As time passed, the atmosphere began to clear up a little. The cloud of ash was still thin, but faint rays of sunlight were starting to break through. And for the first time after the asteroid impact, the Earth felt the warmth of the sun again. The ice slowly began to melt, and the extreme cold started to subside. And the once poisonous air slowly became more breathable. It was as if the planet breathed again after a very long nightmare. But that didn't mean the forests immediately returned. Many trees still looked dead, their branches were brittle. The roots were rotting under the thick ash. The soil itself had almost no nutrients left. But in the midst of that destruction, the first plants began to reclaim the earth. Ferns. According to scientists, there's something called a fern spike in the fossil record. It happens right after a mass extinction event. This means a huge amount of fern spores were found in the layers of soil after the asteroid impact, because ferns aren't picky about their environment. They don't need perfect conditions. Even in ash, mud, or a destroyed ecosystem, they can survive. They slowly spread across the once burned land. They're not tall plants, they're not beautiful, but they became the first sign of green in a world that had almost turned gray and black. After a few years, valleys and plains were once again covered with plants. Life was still weak. The air still sometimes hurts your throat. The rain is still acidic, but it's not as lifeless as before. Little by little, the Earth moved from total extinction to survival. And as the Earth slowly recovers, a new kind of creature began to take over the planet. They were no longer giant dinosaurs, but small, quiet, and resilient survivors. For a long time after the extinction event, the world was almost entirely ruled by small mammals. Most of them were only as big as rats or squirrels. They looked weak, were easily frightened, and mostly came out only at night to avoid danger. But that was exactly the reason why they survived. While the large animals back then needed a lot of food to survive, the small mammals could live on very little. A few insects, plant roots, rotting food on the ground. That was enough for their species to survive. In the former forest that had turned to ash, they began to dig in the soft soil to look for anything to eat. They didn't stray far from their burrows. They moved quickly, always alert. In that new world, the most important skill wasn't strength, but survival instinct. Alongside them, there was another group of survivors that was slowly increasing in number: birds. According to fossil evidence, most of the birds that survived back then weren't high-flying predators. They were not like the large creatures that once flew in the skies during the time of the dinosaurs. The ones that survived were the simple ground birds, birds that searched for food on the ground, those that built their nests low, those that could survive even when there were almost no trees or forests left. At that time, flying was almost useless, because what used to be full of branches and forests had become a vast land of ash and broken wood. Nothing ruled the skies anymore. But while that was happening on land, there was also a big change in the ocean. The atmosphere was slowly clearing up, and for the first time after a long period of darkness, enough sunlight once again reached the surface of the sea. It was still faint, a pale light, but it was enough for plankton to start coming back, and even though those organisms are only microscopic, they are the foundation of the entire marine ecosystem. When the plankton returns, the small fish gradually come back. When the small fish increase in number, the bigger ones will follow. It's like the Earth is slowly restarting its own food chain. And according to scientists, the recovery of life happened faster than previously expected. It's not fast from a human perspective, but it's fast for a planet. Within around 100,000 years after the asteroid impact, the number of mammal species on Earth doubled. And by around 300,000 years, there were more mammal species than before the extinction event happened. This means that while one world is disappearing, a new one is already beginning to form. And after around 700,000 years, another big change happened. Mammals started to grow larger. In the early days after the impact, it was almost impossible for large animals to survive because of hunger and extreme cold. That's why most of the survivors back then were very small. But now the dinosaurs are gone. The world is empty. And because nothing ruled over many ecosystems anymore, mammals had the opportunity to evolve in different directions. Little by little, they became bigger, faster, and smarter. Some descendants of those small survivors would eventually become elephants, whales, and other giant animals that would live millions of years after the extinction. But at this point in Earth's history, that's not what's important yet. Because the real heroes in this new world are not the strongest, nor the biggest, but those creatures who know how to wait. Species that survived not because they were dominant, but because they could endure while the world was falling apart around them. And that's what Earth's history keeps showing us over and over. When there's a mass extinction, the old world never really comes back. Too much is lost for that to happen. Instead, a new world forms from what remains. Simpler, quieter, but ready to start again. And this is where one important thing becomes clearer. Extinction isn't just about who died. Sometimes it's even more important who survived. Because every creature that survives carries with it a small piece of the future. They don't know it yet, but they're quiet, running through the ashes, digging in the ground and searching for food in the midst of a ruined world will become the first steps in the new history of Earth. As the light returned, the planet didn't immediately become beautiful. Everything didn't suddenly turn green. The world was like a wounded body slowly healing. There were places that recovered faster. There were also places that remained almost lifeless for a very long time. In the former forests, the plants that spread easily were the first to thrive. They were not like the big trees that needed a long time to grow. These plants were simple, fast, and could survive even if the soil was not perfect. This is where the small world of insects began to return. And when the insects came back, there was once again food for larger creatures. This is what is often overlooked in the recovery of the Earth. The new world does not begin with giants. It starts with the small ones, with the worms underground, with the ants making new paths, with the beetles eating decaying wood, with the fungi breaking down dead plants and turning them back into food for the soil. They're like nature's silent repair team. No noise, no drama, but they're the first to fix the damaged planet. While the bigger animals are still waiting for a more stable environment, it's the small organisms that build the foundation. They slowly return nutrients to the soil. Little by little, they make it possible for things to grow again. And with every new plant that grows, there's new food. With every new food source, there's a new chance for life. This is how Earth's recovery works. It's not fast, it's not straightforward. Some places recover, some places fall again. But as long as there is life left, there's a possibility for the whole system to start again. In rivers and lakes, the return happens differently, because even though terrible things happened on land and in the sea, some freshwater environments became like temporary shelters. Freshwater, especially if it's deep or has mud at the bottom, can store heat and food longer than open land. That's where some fish, amphibians, turtles, and other animals that don't need to eat every day were hiding. Some of them can slow down their body movements, can wait, and can survive on very little energy. So in the new world, it's not always the most aggressive who wins. Sometimes the ones who know how to conserve their energy win. On this kind of planet, eating too fast, having a very large body, and having very high energy requirements become disadvantages. What used to be a symbol of power suddenly becomes a burden. Here the rules of survival have changed. Before, the big ones dominated. After the asteroid, those with the lowest needs had a better chance. If you can survive on little food, you have a chance. If you can hide underground, you have a chance. If you can eat anything, you have a chance. If you can wait for the world to get better, you have a chance. And as time passed, habitats started to become more complex again. The once flat land of ash slowly grew new plants. The once quiet swamp began to stir. The once dark sea was filled again with plankton, fish, and predators. But there was one powerful group. This was no longer the world of the dinosaurs. A different cast was now on stage. The mammals, who used to be just background characters in Earth's story, were now slowly stepping into the spotlight. They didn't look impressive yet. They weren't elephants, whales, lions, or humans yet, but within them was the beginning of all those things. With each generation, there were small changes. Some had a sharper sense of smell. Some could run faster. Some were better at digging. Some could eat new kinds of food. And when the world is full of empty spaces, new strategies spread quickly. This is what scientists call adaptive radiation. It simply means that when there are many vacant roles in nature, a group of animals can evolve in many different ways. It's like a whole city where most of the jobs suddenly disappeared. There were openings for hunters, climbers, swimmers, fruit eaters, and insect eaters. And the mammals gradually filled those roles. Some became more suited for the trees, some became more suited for the ground, some became more suited for the water. Some became more active at night. Some started to rely more on their sense of smell and hearing. In other words, they didn't just multiply, they diversified. And that was the true beginning of a new era. But it wasn't just mammals that changed. Birds, too, from just a few survivors, began to fill new niches in the world. Some became excellent flyers. Some became runners. Some became hunters. Some became seed eaters. Some became scavengers. And because many of their former enemies were gone, they had a wider range of places to live. The world that was once full of giant reptiles gradually became a world of lighter, more adaptable, and more flexible creatures. Here, we can see a deep lesson from natural history. The strongest doesn't always win in normal times. When the world is stable, being big, strong, and dominant is an advantage. But when the whole planet changes, it's a different kind of winner. The flexible ones survive. Those who know how to adapt last. Those who can change their food, shelter, and behavior have a future. That's why an extinction event is like a brutal reset button for Earth. It doesn't start life from scratch, but it erases many of the old rules. And when the old rules are gone, those who were once on the sidelines get a new chance. For millions of years after that, Earth will continue to change. The forests will grow strong again. The grasslands will expand. There will be new predators and prey. Animals will emerge that would never have had a chance if the old world had remained. And in the distant future, from the small survivors barely noticeable in the ashes, primates will emerge. From the primates will come the ancestors of humans. And in the final part of that very long story, there will be a species that will look up at the sky, study rocks, fossils, craters, and the atmosphere, and try to understand how they got here. That is us. So when we talk about the asteroid that hit the Earth, it's not just a story about the extinction of the dinosaurs. It's also a story about possibility. That tragedy with its vast effects is what opened the door to the world we know today. If the asteroid hadn't struck, if the old order of the planet hadn't collapsed, if the ecosystems hadn't been vacated, the Earth might look very different today. Maybe there wouldn't be mammals that grew in this way. Maybe there wouldn't be primates climbing trees. Maybe there wouldn't be humans asking how it all began. And this is where the story gets even stranger. An event that almost wiped out the entire world was also what paved the way for us. Not because it was planned, not because extinction is kind, but because in nature, even the greatest destruction can become the raw material for a new beginning. Earth doesn't go back to the way it was. It doesn't bring back what was lost. What it does is take whatever is left, and from there, it creates a new world. And in that new world, the small survivors become the first architects of the future.